In February of 1986, a frost settled thick over Birch Hollow. It clung to branches like bone dust, painted window panes with cracking lines and swallowed sound. Tucked at the edge of the hollow was an old state-run foster home, part Victorian mansion, part institution where 3 siblings were placed temporarily, though there was never anything temporary about the house. The paperwork said they'd been moved due to overcrowding, but those familiar with the system knew that words like overcrowding often meant something else. The 3, 2 brothers and a sister, arrived just after Christmas. They were quiet, not unusually so, just rehearsed. They kept to themselves, rarely spoke during meals, and never played outside even when the snow was fresh. Staff noted nothing strange, but residents remembered them differently. The youngest, a boy barely 9, used to sketch spirals into his bedsheets with the tip of a fork. The girl, 11, sometimes whispered answers to questions no one had asked aloud. The older boy, 15, seemed more like a caretaker than a sibling, always watching, always aware. They vanished on February 2020, somewhere between evening rounds and morning headcount. The staff was disorganized, as always, and it wasn't until nearly noon that anyone filed a report. The front door was locked from the inside. The basement windows were sealed. There were no footprints outside, no broken latches, no disturbed snow except a single trail leading to the edge of the frozen lake just beyond the property, where it stopped suddenly, like they had been swallowed whole. Only one item was found at the shoreline, a broken disposable camera, the film still inside, half wound. For weeks, search parties canvassed the woods. Dogs were brought in but caught no scent. The lake was partially drained, no bodies, no clothing, no clues. Local rumors began to swirl. Some said the foster home was cursed. Others whispered about a silent guardian who lived in the woods. A few claimed to have seen lights under the lake ice weeks before the disappearance. Theories came and went. Some thought the children had run away. Others believed they'd been taken by someone from inside the home. But without evidence, the case froze in more ways than one. By 1987, the home had quietly shut its doors. Funding was pulled, records sealed. The town forgot. And then the town itself began to shrink. Families moved away. The lake, once central to summer camps and fishing weekends, was left to rot behind fences and warning signs. The shoreline grew tall with weeds. Rusted signs pointed nowhere. 38 years later, in the summer of 2024, a drought cracked open the lakebed. The water level dropped to its lowest point since 1929. What had once been a smooth sheet of winter ice had become a grave of cracked mud, fossilized logs, and rusted metal. The city contracted a utility crew to reroute piping beneath the exposed basin. The lead foreman, digging near the lake's southern trench, hit concrete. At first, they thought it was a foundation from an old dock, but the slab was curved, too symmetrical. A rebar grate covered a 6-foot opening, sealed in chain, the links wrapped and fused by time. Beneath it, stairs, narrow and old, not stone, not concrete, wood, burnt at the edges, blackened like from an old fire. The walls around the tunnel were lined with earth, reinforced by beams that shouldn't have lasted this long. As one of the crew descended, his flashlight caught on something reflective embedded in the wall. Dozens of them. Shards. No, not shards of mirror fragments. Smooth, etched, carved with what looked like children's initials. The further they went, the colder it got. They stopped when they reached a wooden door, bolted from the outside. There was no logical explanation for how it survived underwater for decades, let alone remained intact. Still, the team called it in. 2 days later, the area was declared a controlled scene, and when authorities unbolted the door, the air that hissed out was dry, stale, and freezing. Inside was a room no larger than a school classroom. Cement floor, soot-covered walls, and dozens of child-sized items arranged in a circle. 3 chairs, 3 plates, 3 metal cups. A chalk drawing of a lake spanned one wall, complete with boats and a half-sunken tree stump. At the center of the room sat a small table with an analog reel-to-reel recorder still threaded, still intact. But that wasn't all. In the back corner, Under a tarp that had turned black with mildew, they found clothes, small, shoes, jackets, shirts matching the photos from 1986. Beneath them, stuffed into the corner like something forgotten, was a sketchbook wrapped in plastic, the pages warped but readable. They turned the recorder on. The sound was faint, static, then a voice. A child. Breathing. Then whispering, "You're not supposed to find us." The voice crackled again. Another whisper. A word repeated several times. 3, 3, 3. The agent on site shut the machine off. No bodies were recovered. No bones. No fingerprints. But something had survived down there. Something had waited. And across the next few days, as experts began cataloging the evidence, someone filed a tip anonymously. A woman had come into a local library weeks earlier, disoriented, quiet. She'd asked for microfiche from the 1980s. She'd looked through dozens of old photos. And then she'd left behind a single drawing. 3 figures. A lake. A tunnel beneath. The library kept it. And on the back was a name that matched the oldest sibling who vanished that night in 1986. She walked into the shelter just after 10 p.m., barefoot, clothes damp from the storm, a canvas bag pressed to her chest like it was part of her body. The intake worker, a college student on the night shift, said she didn't say anything at first, just stood there, dripping water onto the tiles. Her eyes didn't meet anyone else's. When asked for a name, she hesitated. The only word she said aloud was, "Kellen." It wasn't clear if she was naming herself or someone else. What unsettled the staff most wasn't her silence. It was her stillness. She didn't fidget, didn't shake, not even when the shelter doctor asked to check her vitals. Her skin was cold but unbroken, nails short, no marks of restraint, no visible signs of abuse. But she flinched when the light caught her face. Her pupils didn't react normally. She wore a necklace made from wire and dried pine needles, twisted into a tight loop. Later, when a social worker gently unzipped the canvas bag she clutched, they found a set of notebooks sealed in dry plastic. The pages were coded, written in repetitive childlike symbols, triangles, spirals, slashes. One phrase appeared over and over again. Scattered through different pages, "We listened, we obeyed." The local PD ran her fingerprints through the state system. Nothing. Then through the federal. And then, with a quiet urgency, one officer decided to cross-check the old Birch Hollow files digitized years ago, but rarely accessed. There was a match. Not a direct one. A relative link. The girl was not Kellen. She was Iris, the youngest sibling. Officially presumed dead in 1986, only 9 years old when she vanished. Now, standing barefoot in a shelter lobby, she was nearly 50. She hadn't aged a day. The shelter's CCTV footage was grainy, but the timestamp was unmistakable. July 11th, 2024. The exact day the storm drain in the lakebed was uncovered. The same hour, in fact. She never returned to the shelter. The next morning her bed was neatly made. The bag was gone. So was she. But before she vanished again, she left one of the notebooks behind, open on the pillow. Drawn across 2 pages was a crude floor plan, a large circle marked playroom, a hallway lined with square shapes labeled beds, and, at the bottom, a door drawn in red crayon with 4 thick vertical lines across it. The caption underneath said, "He stayed there. We weren't allowed to look at him." News of the lakebed discovery never reached the public in its true form. Officials told the media the chamber was a historical bootlegging site, a leftover from Prohibition, nothing criminal. No names were released, no audio. The tape, the one that whispered, "You're not supposed to find us," was sealed into evidence and marked under federal jurisdiction. Some believed it was immediately transferred to private intelligence labs. Others said it was destroyed. But those who were there, the first responders and analysts who saw the chamber before the feds arrived, couldn't forget. A photo of the Chalk Lake drawing made it out. quietly leaked onto a private forum frequented by missing persons researchers. It spread slowly, posted under the innocuous title, Unfound 1986. But the image struck a nerve. One user claimed they recognized the tree in the chalk drawing and said it matched a real tree near Birch Hollow's southern ridge, just beyond the fence line. The tree had been split by lightning in 1979. The top half burned, the trunk hollowed but left standing. Underneath the photo was a comment, "They used to say the tree could hear you." From that moment, everything spiraled again. A retired detective name, redacted in the report, drove 600 miles after seeing the image. He'd worked the Birch Hollow disappearance briefly in the 80s before being reassigned. In 1987, he'd interviewed a janitor who worked at the foster home. The man said he found strange carvings in the cellar floor, circles, names, 3 cups always arranged in a triangle, and once a bundle of wires tied like a doll, buried inside the wall insulation. The detective filed the notes, but the foster home shut down weeks later. The janitor was never interviewed again. He moved west and died in 2002. The detective arrived in Birch Hollow quietly in August 2024. He wore an old brown coat, the kind you only ever see in faded photographs. He didn't check into a motel, didn't notify the department. But local shopkeepers remembered him because he carried a folder everywhere, wrapped in twine, always pressed against his side. That folder was later recovered from the abandoned chapel near the hollow's edge. Inside, photocopied journal pages from 1986, hand-drawn floor plans, a cassette tape labeled Session 5, and 3 Polaroids taped to the inside flap. All 3 were of the foster children, 2 boys, 1 girl. In the last photo, their faces were turned away. The girl's hand was raised, covering her mouth. They were standing in front of the lake, at dusk. A 4th shadow stretched beside them, too tall to be any of them. Someone had drawn an X over the shadow in red ink. The tape was degraded. Experts say the heat damage may have been intentional, but fragments were still audible. Scratches of sound, children counting. Then one sentence muffled, but unmistakable. He said if we remember his name, we disappear again. The case reopened quietly, this time under a task force code named Midwinter. Only a handful of analysts were cleared to review the original evidence. But those who did began to notice a pattern not just in the drawings or the tapes, but in the names themselves. Across all the notes recovered, the chalkboard in the underground room, the notebooks Iris carried, the carvings on the mirror shards, certain letters were always missing. Specifically, H-I-M. None of the children wrote them. None of the names began with them. None of the sentences contained them, even when they should, as if their very presence was avoided. One analyst, known only by initials in the internal report, believed the children had been taught to redact reality itself, that the room beneath the lake wasn't just a hiding place. It was a training site, a rehearsal for forgetting. And the one they were taught to forget wasn't just a man. It was something they called the quiet shape. By early September, the case files for Midwinter had grown from a single locked cabinet to an entire floor of archival storage in a secure facility just outside the Capitol. The temperature in the archive was set to 58 degrees. Lights stayed dim. Every item was handled with nitrile gloves. Not for forensic integrity, those steps had long since been processed, but because many of the agents and archivists who handled the materials began reporting similar symptoms: lightheadedness, audio distortions, a faint smell of pine or vinegar that lingered long after the items were returned to containment. Some reports were dismissed, others logged formally, but the patterns persisted. The tape labeled Session 5 continued to be a source of quiet obsession. Its content wasn't linear snippets of song, indistinct whispers, a child reciting numbers out of order, sudden pauses where no sound existed but static cracked in like breath through teeth. Engineers who worked on it said the gaps in frequency weren't natural. Certain waveforms were bent, folded, compressed, and buried in reverse frequencies, like the voice was trying not to be heard, even as it spoke. When the audio was run through old analog equipment rather than modern digital filters, a new phrase emerged, one that hadn't been heard on digital playback. Ask, and you are seen. It repeated 3 times, each quieter than the last, the final one barely audible beneath a bed of static. The phrase was entered into the keyword matrix, cross-referenced with interviews from the 1980s. And there it was, buried in an unfilled testimonial from a former resident of the foster home. The boy, 17 at the time of interview, said he used to see shapes outside the window at night. Asked to describe them, he said, "They were quiet. You only saw them when you asked something out loud. They waited for questions." The investigator dismissed it then as a product of trauma and isolation. But now, paired with the tape, it no longer felt like a delusion. Meanwhile, in Birch Hollow, a small team returned to the dried lake bed not to excavate, but to investigate the perimeter. Drone footage revealed a trench, invisible from ground level, cutting a wide spiral pattern along the dry bed. A near-perfect circle carved shallow into the earth, like something heavy had once been dragged across it repeatedly. At the center of the spiral stood the split tree, the one struck by lightning in 1979. And there, half buried beneath its roots, a local volunteer uncovered a second tunnel. This one collapsed. Charred wood, fragments of doll limbs, wire bundles wrapped in silk string, and a jawbone, small, human, missing molars. This time, they didn't call the press. They called the task force. Inside the collapsed tunnel was a second room, burned and collapsed but partially intact. Unlike the first chamber, this one had no furniture, no childlike drawings. Instead, the walls were covered in soot-darkened handprints, hundreds of them, different sizes, all reaching upward, as though trying to climb the walls. No names, no symbols, no toys. Except one. At the far end, sealed inside a rusted toolbox, was a single cassette. It had no label, but someone had etched a small spiral into its plastic casing, carved with something sharp enough to leave grooves. When played, the tape offered no words, just the sound of humming, a low, repetitive note rising and falling slowly, like a breath. Every few seconds, the hum broke into something that resembled a laugh but warped, slowed, almost robotic. Near the end of the recording, the humming stopped. The last sound on the tape was a match being struck, then silence. When shown to a trauma linguist specializing in phonetic recall, they identified the hum as a child's lullaby but distorted by age and tempo. Notably, the melody matched the tune sung by one of the survivors in an unrelated 1994 missing persons case in a town 200 miles away. The children in that case were also from a foster home. They also disappeared. 2 were never found. 1 was returned a week later naked, silent, holding a bundle of wires. She had no memory of the week, but in a hospital bed, she hummed that same tune in her sleep, over and over. The connection wasn't coincidence. More drawings surfaced this time, in a box found hidden inside the foundation of the old Birch Hollow Chapel. A man renovating the property had broken into the brickwork, following a series of hollow knocks. Inside was a tin box, the kind used for storing communion wafers. Inside, hundreds of folded paper slips. Each was a drawing childlike and crude, all done in black or red. No names, no dates, but the symbols were familiar. Spirals, tally marks, open circles with dots in the center. On some pages, tiny figures were drawn without faces. Others were labeled in shaky, misspelled words. One said, "He watches under the floor." Another, "Don't say his number." One that sent investigators into complete silence showed 3 small figures standing beneath a large wooden beam. Above them was a hanging wire. On the floor, a triangle with a symbol in the middle, 3 interlocking spirals. Below the image was a phrase, "He said we were his." In the days that followed, 2 more witnesses came forward, not from the foster home but from nearby towns. Both were former caseworkers from the late 1980s. Both had visited Birch Hollow during the time of the original investigation. Both admitted now in their 60s that they were asked not to report what they saw in the lakebed tunnels at the time. They were told to let it go, that the home had people watching over it, that some things were better left buried. One of them, visibly shaken during a taped interview, said, "We didn't know what it was, just that the children weren't being hidden from the world. They were being hidden from something else." Then she added, "And maybe they weren't the ones being kept in. Maybe it was about keeping something out." That tape never aired publicly. But inside the task force, it was played daily. Because they all felt the sense that the story wasn't over, that someone had returned, that Iris wasn't alone, and the real question wasn't where she had been. It was what had come back with her. Lines of the notebook like a child trying to remember how letters work. The pages smelled faintly of smoke and damp earth. Investigators found the notebook tucked inside the wall of the former Birch Hollow foster home, behind a mirror in what used to be the girls' bathroom. Most of the pages were blank. But in the middle, 27 lines were filled with repetitive text, each phrase nearly identical, written in various shades of black and gray pencil. We were told to stay quiet. We were told not to move. We were told he only comes when we forget his name. We were told to forget. Then a blank page. Then a torn corner stapled into the spine. And on it, written in blood-red ink, "He's still hungry." No one could confirm who had written it. Iris had never returned, but more notebooks were discovered in odd places: church pews, basements, even left behind at rest stops near the highway that ran parallel to the old Birch Hollow woods. Each one showed signs of water damage, some with pages fused together, others with mold blooming between entries like ink that had come alive. One particularly damaged notebook contained crude portraits, children drawn in pencil, some with eyes, others without. Most stood alone. But in one drawing, 7 children were positioned in a circle around a single shape. It was impossible to make out what the shape was, just a scribbled black mass. Jagged lines extended from it like limbs. Above it, a title, "The Quiet Boy." When the drawing was digitally cleaned up by forensic artists, faint lettering became visible in the top left corner. 5 block letters, all capitalized. "Listen." But no E. Another pattern. Specialists working with the task force began to suggest that the omissions weren't accidents or illiteracy. They were a form of control. Linguistic trauma, structured to deny the name of a person, thing, or force. One researcher proposed that the children were trained to unwrite specific words, not by force, but through ritual. Like spells, only backward. Protective not because they held power, but because they withheld it. That theory was reinforced when a second voice was extracted from the Session 5 tape. The background audio, layered beneath the static and children's whispers, revealed a faint adult male voice, nearly imperceptible, until frequency matched and isolated. The words were chilling. "If they say it, they wake it." Investigators scoured the region for more evidence. Old shelters, records, places the children might have been taken. They returned to the tree at the center of the spiral lake bed, this time digging deeper. Under its roots, buried inside what looked like an old drainage drum, they found bones small, fractured, with markings inconsistent with weather erosion. The markings were geometric, repeated, triangular patterns etched into the ribs and femurs. Someone or something had inscribed symbols onto the remains. The bones belonged to a child no older than 6. No match was found in the national database. Then came the phone call. A retired hospice nurse, now in her 80s, said she remembered a girl named Iris. Not in 1986, but in 1999. Said she worked in a private facility in upstate New York. That the girl had been brought in by a religious group who refused to sign state documentation. Said the girl never spoke, but drew, endlessly, spirals, circles, eyes with no centers. She said they kept her sedated most of the time. Said her file disappeared the day after she did. The nurse provided a photocopy of a sketch left behind. A house submerged underwater. No roof, no doors. And on the hill beside it, a figure drawn entirely in black. When shown the sketch, the current case analyst noted a disturbing correlation. The submerged house matched the floor plan of the underground room found beneath the lake. Not approximately, exactly. Measurements align. Windows, where they shouldn't be. Beams. The layout. The orientation. The nurse swore Iris had never been outside the facility, that she couldn't have known that structure existed. And yet she did. In response, the task force requested thermal scans of the surrounding forest beyond the lake perimeter. They expected soil variations, maybe some heat pockets. What they found instead was a void. A circular region just beyond the spiral trench registered colder than any surrounding area by nearly 15 degrees. No explanation. No logical environmental cause. No wildlife, no insects, not even fungal growth. Just silence. And at the center of the void, a narrow, rectangular slab of stone, half buried, covered in moss. It looked like a grave marker, but had no name, no date. Just a spiral etched into its surface, but not just scratched and burned into it, as if seared by heat or time or something else entirely. The stone was removed and examined in a controlled lab. Beneath the top layer was a second carving the word "Remember" scratched over again and again until it became unreadable. Back at the archive, another tape was discovered mislabeled in the Session 5 batch. It was marked "Repeaters." No date, no identifier. The tape began with static, then a knock, 3 knocks, then silence, then a child's voice reciting, "If you find this, don't look behind you." Then laughter. Not a child's laugh. Something deeper, lower, stretched. At this point, analysts requested a psychological evaluation for all personnel working on Midwinter longer than 90 days. Fatigue, insomnia, nosebleeds, hallucinations. One officer was hospitalized after claiming to see faces in the mirror of the evidence lab. When asked to clarify, she said, "Not faces like people, faces like echoes." The project slowed, then stopped. Publicly, it was said to be due to budget reallocations. Internally, the reason was clear. The thing they had started to uncover was not a crime. It was a system, and it hadn't ended in 1986. It had merely gone quiet. In the early hours of November 2024, a small house fire was reported at the outskirts of a dying town 30 miles east of Birch Hollow. The fire was minor, mostly smoke. No casualties. The owner, an elderly man known locally as a recluse, claimed it started in the basement, where he stored old hunting gear. He refused treatment, refused to speak to the responding officers. But what caught the fire marshal's attention wasn't the blaze. It was the way the fire had moved. The pattern of damage on the concrete floor beneath the ash was circular, exact, centered around a blackened hole where a wood-burning stove had once sat. Around it, in soot, were faint scrawled marks. Spirals, triangles, 3 repeating letters, R, S, and O. The fire team called in a local historian who'd previously worked with the Midwinter Task Force. He arrived at the scene just before sunrise. When he stepped into the basement, he froze. The symbols weren't random. They matched the carvings found on the child's bones recovered from the collapsed tunnel beneath the tree. He asked to see the homeowner. The man, gaunt and trembling, was seated on the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket. He wouldn't speak at first, just stared. His hands clutched a photograph bent, water-stained, half-burned. The image showed 4 children sitting around a table. None of them were looking at the camera. In the corner of the photo, a sliver of a 5th figure, barely visible, but tall, too tall. Its head bent sideways like it couldn't fit in the frame. The man finally spoke. Voice cracked. Said the photo was taken in 1985. Said he used to work at the Birch Hollow foster home. Said he ran the boiler room. They called it the furnace back then, that the children used to be sent down there as punishment. Not because it was cold, but because it was silent. No echoes, no sounds, just stone and steam and shadow. He said that's where it came from. It was always there, he whispered. We didn't bring it, we just fed it. The photo was taken as evidence. When scanned and digitally enhanced, analysts noticed something else. The table the children sat at wasn't flat. It was built around a circular depression, like a ring. And in the center, a dark spot, burned in, perfectly round. Comparisons were made. The ring matched the table recovered from the underwater chamber. The grooves, the burn pattern, even the leg placement. It wasn't a photograph of someplace similar. It was the same table, 39 years earlier, meaning the underground room had once existed above ground before being buried, or worse, submerged. That revelation changed the scope of the case, because if the room was moved, or if something had caused it to sink, that meant someone or something had done it intentionally, to hide or to preserve. Agents began re-examining the oldest pieces of evidence. Tapes, photos, journals. They looked again at the notebook left behind at the shelter, the one Iris had carried. On the final page, faint pencil markings barely visible beneath the graphite. They were numbers, coordinates. The location led to an abandoned coal chute 4 towns away, long sealed, no public access. But when ground-penetrating radar was brought in, they discovered a tunnel running beneath it. Again, the same shape, same depth. Inside, they found another room. This one was different, newer, less soot, no children's artifacts, just a metal chair bolted to the floor, a ring of mirrors surrounding it, no tape machine, no chalk drawings. But something else. A strip of film, hanging from a nail, light-sensitive, faded nearly to nothing. Developed, it showed an image of a child, no face, just the back of a head, standing in a doorway that led to pitch black. Written across the bottom, in tiny, fragmented script, "Let me remember." The film degraded completely after development. No negatives. For weeks, nothing else surfaced. Then, a second sighting was reported. A woman fitting Iris's description was seen walking through a train yard just past midnight. Security footage confirmed it was the same canvas bag and same clothes. She walked with precision, stopping only to pick up what looked like a torn sheet of paper. Investigators found that paper hours later lodged beneath a rusted track. It had one word on it: below. The word was drawn with 3 vertical lines through the middle. That symbol was later matched to etchings found in the bone markers recovered at the second tunnel site, specifically on the skull fragment believed to be from a 7-year-old child. It was also seen in one other place. A note left in 1994 by a boy who went missing for 2 weeks and returned unable to speak. He drew that same word, below, with the same 3 lines. When asked what it meant, he cried, just once, then tapped 3 times on the table. The same pattern heard at the start of Session 5. 3 knocks, silence, then the voice. The agents realized they weren't chasing a person. They were following a ritual, a pattern that repeated not through time but through memory. Every child that survived referenced silence, not the absence of noise but the weight of it, the pressure of being in a place where even thoughts had to be quiet, where asking a question wasn't curiosity. It was a summons. Ask, and you are seen. Those words weren't a warning. They were an invitation. And in the center of it all, there was never a name. Only the shape, always the shape, described by different children in different eras. A tall boy with no mouth, a man with glass for skin, a voice that walks, something that lives behind forgetting. They hadn't been hidden by accident. They had been chosen. Made to forget, made to listen, and then left, not to die, but to remember just enough to bring the rest of it back. The winter came early in 2024, a cold snap so sudden the trees still held their leaves when the frost painted them white. In Birch Hollow, The ground froze hard, sealing the disturbed lakebed like a wound scabbing over. Investigators halted excavation. Locals, already wary, refused to enter the woods. There were stories again, whispers of lights seen through the trees, of children's laughter echoing where no children played. And in the archive facility, something changed. The recordings of every reel, cassette, and digitized audio tied to the midwinter case began to behave oddly. Digital files corrupted themselves. Tapes degraded faster than expected. Audio would twist and warp even without playback. One technician claimed to hear whispering even with headphones unplugged. He left the project, moved across the country without resignation, said he was being followed by a song he couldn't forget. They say he left a note on his apartment wall, carved into the plaster with a screwdriver. Don't sing it. The task force restructured. A new director was brought in, clinical, methodical. She didn't believe in folklore or pattern trauma. She believed in systems, in human decisions, and human consequences. But her resolve began to waver the day she visited the original site beneath the lake. What disturbed her wasn't the chamber, or the spirals, or even the tapes. It was a new discovery missed in previous searches. Behind a cracked wall near the floor was a second panel, flush with the concrete, a square no larger than a child's shoebox. Hidden, when pried open, it revealed a small compartment lined with cloth. Inside, a single object, a tooth, but not a child's. It was too long, too sharp, like something between a fang and a tool. The enamel was gray, translucent at the tip, and it vibrated faintly when touched, like a tuning fork. Lab analysis returned inconclusive results. It didn't match any human or animal database. The closest correlation was fossilized dentition from predatory deep-sea species, except this one was newer, modern, untouched by sediment or mineralization. It shouldn't exist. The director ordered it sealed in a lead case. No further analysis. Her notes, however, told a different story. In them, she recorded dreams, nightmares that began after handling the tooth. She wrote of voices, a voice, low, speaking in fragments. Not words, memories. She wrote, "It speaks in shapes. I dream in spirals. I wake to silence, and the silence is loud." The tooth was never reported in the official record. It was labeled non-evidentiary and archived. A week later, the director resigned. Her replacement requested a full case summary and began a side investigation into survivors of unrelated missing persons cases between 1980 and 2005, specifically those found near water, woods, or tunnels. They identified 14 individuals. 7 were deceased, suicide, disappearance, or institutionalization. Of the remaining 7, 3 were contacted. 2 declined to speak. 1 agreed to meet. She was found living in a commune 4 states away. No digital footprint, no government aid. She'd changed her name, but her handwriting matched notes found in the 1994 notebook. She remembered the name Iris. She remembered the song. And she remembered something else. "The red rope," she said. "It tied our doors shut at night, not so we wouldn't leave, so nothing would open them." She said the rooms were always cold, not from lack of heat, from something beneath the floor, like breath, always waiting, listening. "They said we were selected," she said, "that we were to forget and then to carry, that we were little boats." She drew a picture, an oval with 3 stick figures inside, floating over a large black scribble. When asked what the scribble was, she stared blankly. "Don't say it," she said. "You're already too close." The interviewer paused. She began humming. The same lullaby. Same intervals. Same rise and fall. Like she was soothing something that wasn't there. Back at the archive, the team decided to re-examine Session 5. A fresh analog copy had been discovered in a mislabeled evidence box, sealed inside a mirrored envelope. This copy was clearer. The gaps in frequency less severe, and something new emerged. At minute 11:47, a voice, An adult male says one word. Listen. It's the only time it's spoken clearly, without static, without distortion. It's followed by a chorus of breathing. 9 voices. Children. One of the analysts broke down the audio into individual tracks. Each voice was on its own loop. Each breathing pattern repeated at the same interval. Perfectly timed. Except one. The 9th voice. It didn't breathe. It clicked. The analyst refused to isolate it further. She resigned that evening. Left her badge on her desk. She wrote nothing. Just slipped a piece of paper beneath her door with a single phrase in pencil. It doesn't forget us. The task force reclassified the recordings. No further auditory analysis allowed. Instead, attention turned to physical evidence again. The symbols, the spirals, their geometry, their alignment. An outside mathematician was brought in to analyze the drawings without context. She spent 2 days in silence, mapping the lines, studying the ratios. On the 3rd day, she asked one question. Why would children be drawing diagrams of containment locks? She explained that the patterns matched a specific form of geometric coding used in ancient architecture, meant to keep something in, not out. She was asked to elaborate. She said nothing, just pointed to the spiral etched into the chamber wall. That's not decoration, she said. That's a warning. She left before sunset. Her diagrams remain. One of them showed a floor plan for the first chamber. But beneath it, drawn in red, was a second level. Identical in shape, but reversed. Inverted. A reflection beneath the ground. No access point. No stairs. Just a single word in the middle of the drawing. Mirror. And beneath that, it's not the room we found. It's the one we didn't. In early December, as snow began to fall again over Birch Hollow, the task force returned to the lake. The water had frozen over in thin sheets, cracked and glistening under a pale sky. Most of the site had been sealed, barricaded behind chain link and official signage. But beneath the frost, the spiral trench was still visible, etched into the dried earth like an ancient wound refusing to close. It was time to dig again. This time, they weren't looking for another chamber. They were looking for a mirror. Ground-penetrating radar had confirmed something beneath the known structure. A second void, perfectly symmetrical, resting 20 feet below the chamber previously discovered. There were no access points. No stairs. No air vents. Just empty space, like something had been embedded there and sealed completely. A bore drill was brought in. It made it 13 feet before the bit snapped clean off. The metal fractured, not from rock or obstruction, but from pressure. Internal, sudden, like something inside the earth had pushed back. 3 engineers quit on the spot. The site was closed again. But that night, one of the engineers returned alone. He left his phone at home, brought only a lantern and a notebook. They found him 3 days later, kneeling at the edge of the frozen lake, both hands submerged beneath the ice. The flesh on his arms was blackened, frostbitten to the elbow. He wasn't dead. But he didn't respond, just stared through the ice like it was a window. When they pulled him away, he whispered a single phrase. He's upside down. Then silence. Later, when questioned in the hospital, he refused to speak. Doctors noted signs of fugue state trauma, night terrors, but no history of mental illness. His notebook found stuffed inside his jacket contained pages of symbols. Some known, others new. But one page was different. It was blank, except for a handprint pressed in soot. Upside down. Back at the archive, effort shifted again. The second chamber, if it existed, couldn't be accessed physically, but perhaps it could be mapped conceptually. The geometric analysis had revealed something deeper, something linguistic. Every spiral, every triangle, every mirrored symbol wasn't just architectural. They were phonetic, silent language. One linguist proposed a theory. The children weren't just hiding from something. They were being taught how to trap it, using words, using silence, through ritual, repetition, and erasure. The children were the seal, and someone had begun to break it. Iris had vanished again, yes, but traces of her movement continued to appear. An ATM security cam in Kansas, a wildlife cam triggered in Ohio. Each one showed a figure always in the same coat, same canvas bag, never facing the camera, always just passing through. She was following a path, one that mirrored the spiral etched into the lakebed. And in the places she passed through, others began to speak. A woman in her 40s admitted she had once lived in Birch Hollow. She had been there in 1986, not in the foster home, but nearby. She said her sister had been one of the missing children, except her sister was never listed. No file, no record. She was told as a child that her sister never existed. But she remembered her name. 3 letters, gone from every journal, every tape, every sentence. H-I-M. The omission wasn't coincidence. It was control, like cutting the tongue from memory. She said that one night in 1987, long after the disappearances, she heard knocking beneath the floorboards. 3 knocks, then a whisper. A single word. Her sister's name. And in that moment, she remembered everything. But only for a second, because when she tried to write it down, her hand froze. She blacked out. When she woke up, she'd written something else. Not a name. A shape. A figure drawn upside down. Arms too long, mouth too wide, no eyes. The quiet shape. Back at the archive, a breakthrough emerged. The Session 5 tape, the one long assumed to be the original, was analyzed again under a new frequency model. At precisely 23, a sound layered beneath the static was isolated. Not speech, not music, a heartbeat. And it was human, faint, rhythmic, but irregular. Then another, then a third. 3 heartbeats, all mismatched, all overlapping, as if from inside the same body. It was a biological impossibility. Unless it wasn't a body at all. Unless it was something using memory as muscle, voice as nerve, sound as skin. The linguist wrote one final note in her file. We taught them to forget, but what if forgetting is how it survives? The implication was horrifying. What if the purpose of the chamber beneath the lake was not to contain a physical presence, but to create a psychic scar? To bury something beneath the minds of children who would scatter across time and space, carrying fragments of the seal in their silence? What if every memory erased became a doorway? Every word unspoken a path? And now the spiral had begun to turn again. Not just in drawings, not just in dreams, but in places, in people, in the way certain words disappeared from sentences, in the way shadows stayed too long in corners, in the way a song you didn't know how to sing still came back to you in sleep. The question was no longer, what happened in 1986? The question was, what is trying to return through it? In mid-December, the snow deepened in Birch Hollow. The last traces of the spiral trench faded under layers of white, but the feeling lingered. Locals described it as a weight. Not on the chest, but in the air, like pressure without weather, a wrongness in the cold. The kind that made birds stop singing, made dogs whine at doorways for no reason, made lights flicker just once and then never again. The town held a candlelight vigil that winter. Not for the missing children, no one spoke of them aloud anymore, but for something else, an unspoken grief. No signs, no prayers, just people standing silently, heads bowed, as if apologizing to something buried. That same night, 3 separate 911 calls came in from the edge of the forest. Each caller said the same thing. I saw him. No name, no description. Just him. The calls were traced, but by the time officers arrived, the scenes were empty. But all 3 locations shared something strange. Sets of footprints, barefoot, leading into the woods. Only into. None returned. At the archive, The data analysts reviewed the pattern again, the spiral, the distances between appearances of iris, the direction of the reported sightings. The recovered notebooks, always found just after rainfall or near thawed snow. It was all moving in a circle, a slow, deliberate orbit around a central point. The lake, but not the chamber beneath it. The chamber beneath that, the one they still hadn't reached. Another task force meeting was called. No official transcripts were made, but notes leaked weeks later. They spoke of consensus, an understanding that they had reached the boundary of understanding, that what remained was not solvable by standard investigation. One note, hastily scribbled in the margins of the final meeting document, said, "We're not studying it anymore. It's studying us." The linguist left. The second director stopped responding to emails. The analyst who had found the heartbeat layer was found sitting in her car 3 days later, engine off, radio on, tuned to static. Her journal was open on the passenger seat. She had written a phrase repeatedly, hundreds of times, in tiny block letters. Don't answer the third question. No one knew what that meant. Until the interviews started. 3 separate children, each now adults, survivors of different missing persons cases decades apart, agreed to speak off record. Each had gaps in memory. Each suffered from parasomnia, night terrors, auditory hallucinations. All 3 recounted the same story, that they were taken to a room, underground, circular, that they were made to sit in the center, on a cold metal stool, and that a voice would ask them 3 questions. The first, "Do you remember your name?" If they answered yes, the voice would wait. The second, "Do you know where you are?" If they answered no, the voice would hum. But the third question was different every time. Sometimes, "Who else is with you?" Other times, "What did you leave behind?" And once, "What's inside the mirror?" None of them could remember how they answered. But each one said the same thing happened after. A door opened. A shape entered. Not with steps, but with a sound, like teeth grinding behind glass. And then they woke up, far away, alone, with no memory of how they got there. The interviews were cross-referenced with sketches found in the 1999 notebook attributed to Iris. One drawing showed a door with 3 locks. Underneath, a sentence in child handwriting, "Only the third one opens the shape." Suddenly, the phrase in the analyst's journal made sense. Don't answer the third question. Because that's not a question. It's a key. That theory shifted everything again. Back at the archive, only one tape remained unreviewed. Not because it was sealed, because it couldn't be played. It had no spool, just a tightly folded strip of magnetic ribbon, looped and knotted. No audio, no casing, just one label, "Mirror." It was found inside a hollowed-out book left on the desk of the linguist the day she vanished. The book was a collection of myths from rural Appalachia, folklore. In the margins of one story, a tale about a child who lived in a wall, someone had circled a single line. "He walked backward into your eyes and waited behind the glass until you blinked." That line was traced to a folk song recorded in 1911. The lyrics spoke of a lake that never dried, a house that hummed at night, and a boy made of forgetting. The spiral wasn't new. It had been turning for over a century, maybe longer. The final pages of the Midwinter Report were never published. But one image remained. A hand-drawn diagram of a mirror, shattered into 3 parts. Beneath each shard, a name that had been blacked out. At the center, a spiral. And beneath that, one final phrase, barely legible, almost erased. "He learns us by what we hide." January 12th, 2025. Snow fell heavy over Birch Hollow, burying the remnants of the lakebed, the twisted spiral path, the collapsed tree now marked only by a mound of frost. The town had gone silent again. Not in the casual way rural towns do, but with purpose. Windows boarded, radios off. Even the old church bell, once automatic, had been disconnected. Locals said it rang by itself once at midnight 2 weeks earlier. No one wanted to hear it ring again. The Midwinter Task Force, what was left of it, operated remotely now. The archive had been relocated to a secure facility hundreds of miles away, under a false name. All references to Midwinter were purged from official government records. The phrase had been replaced in memos with a symbol, 3 concentric circles intersected by a single vertical line. Internally, it was called the Listening Project. Only 6 staff remained active, not by choice. The rest had either disappeared, resigned, or been reassigned with gag orders. One of the 6, a systems analyst, began reconstructing the timeline not just of the disappearances, but of the locations, artifacts, and symbols. Her discovery was not expected. The spiral wasn't random. It was a calendar. Each loop aligned with known reappearances of iris, of survivors, of evidence. Each ring of the spiral matched a year, and at its center, marked not by an X, but by an absence of data, was 1986. The year everything began, or the year something was buried. The spiral wasn't mapping where it was. It was mapping when it would return. That realization came too late. Because the final ring, the one aligning with 2024, was nearly complete. And there was still one item missing from the pattern. Not a person. Not a chamber. A sound. A song. 2 weeks later, a cassette was delivered anonymously to the new archive. No return address. No postage. Just left in a padded envelope marked Iris. Inside, a blank tape. When played, the recording began with silence, then humming. Not a child's voice. An adult. A woman. The melody was unmistakable, the same lullaby. Same pattern. Same intervals. But this time, halfway through, the voice broke. Not off-key, not distorted. The singer began to cry. Softly, then louder. And then the humming stopped. In its place, whispering. Faint, words almost swallowed. But the analyst enhanced the audio. And this is what she heard. I remembered. He remembered too. The tape ended in static. When reversed, the static resolved into a rhythmic tapping. 3 knocks, followed by silence. And then, layered so faintly, it had to be amplified dozens of times. The voice again. I see you. The lights in the archive flickered and died. Backup power failed. When restored, every screen in the building displayed a single image. A spiral, drawn in black, rotating slowly. No one could explain the breach. No one took credit. The internal server logs were blank for that entire hour, as if the machines had simply forgotten what they were doing. That night, the lead analyst, the last remaining from the original team, received a package at home. No return address. Inside, a child's shoe wrapped in red thread. No tag, no note. Just a photo folded into the sole. It was a photo of her, aged 5, playing in a sandbox. She had never seen it before. On the back, scrawled in charcoal, don't ask the third question. She didn't return to work the next day. She didn't return at all. They found her car parked beside a frozen retention pond 30 miles outside town. Engine off, keys in ignition. Her phone, placed carefully on the dashboard, showed a single audio file open and paused. The file had no name, just the symbol. The 3 circles. The line. No one pressed play. But later, when her home was searched, they found her mirror had been shattered. Each shard laid out perfectly on her floor in a spiral. At the center, another photo. Of the chamber beneath the lake. But from a different angle. One no one had ever taken. It was shot from inside the mirror. Looking out. It meant something was watching. Had been watching. Was waiting. The listening project was officially terminated that week. All materials boxed, sealed, and marked for indefinite cold storage. But the final entry in the logbook, handwritten by the last archivist, said something different. The spiral never ended. We just closed our eyes. Across the country, scattered reports began surfacing, quiet ones. Children drawing spirals on fogged glass. Random notes left behind in shelters and libraries. Do not hum the tune. One hospital reported 3 separate newborns refusing to cry, but clicking their tongues in rhythmic intervals. The shape was returning. Not through violence. Not through blood. Through silence. Through forgetting. Through the ritual of memory eroded. And through every child who still listened when the world told them not to. Every question left unanswered. Every song left half-sung. Every story that ended with a door that never should have opened. The sky over Birch Hollow turned gray in the final days of January. Snow stopped falling, and yet the ground remained frozen. No wind, no birds. The quiet had become physical, oppressive, like a sound that never arrived. Even the trees seemed frozen in breathless anticipation, limbs reaching upward, not as if to catch snow, but to block something above. There was no more digging, no more searching, because by now, the task force understood. This wasn't a trail to follow. It was a loop, a spiral, and they had already walked it to its edge. All that remained was the center. That same week, a document surfaced. No one claimed authorship. It appeared on the archive printer, unrequested, unsigned, but it bore the formatting and coding of internal midwinter files. At the top, one word: manual. Beneath that, dozens of bullet points, each an instruction, not for action but for memory. You must forget him. You must never speak his name. You must never answer the third question. You must carry nothing made of glass. You must hum only half the song. You must never finish drawing the spiral. You must never look into your own reflection while remembering the room. Each line was followed by a number. No explanation. At the bottom of the page, these were taught, these were learned, these were failed. In the margin, someone had scribbled a final note. If she's remembering, then he is too. That same night, a camera trap set up near the old chapel captured an image. Just one. A figure standing by the collapsed tree, head tilted, barefoot, facing the woods. In one hand, a notebook. In the other, a shard of mirror. Iris. She was back. The photo was time-stamped 3:33 a.m. No further footage followed. But the time mattered. Because 3:33 had surfaced before, in the interviews, in the journal entries, in the Session 5 audio, always as the moment things changed. Not when something began, but when it turned, shifted, looked back. From that point on, the sighting stopped. Iris was never seen again. But the evidence didn't stop. More notebooks, more mirror fragments, more whispers left in unlikely places. A janitor found a spiral etched into a hospital toilet bowl. A preschool teacher heard a student humming a lullaby she swore had never been taught. A man in rural Maine called emergency services to report a tall boy made of light standing in the trees. And in a hospice ward in Colorado, a dying woman spoke 3 words before going silent. He's awake now. Every incident marked a turning. Not because they were coordinated, but because they were remembered. Because the spiral, as one analyst put it, was never about finding them. It was about them being found. Or rather, being found again. Every time someone remembered the room. Every time someone drew the shape. Every time the song was hummed past the 5th note. It came closer, not in space, not in time, but in permission. The shape had always required one thing: to be let in. And letting it in wasn't about ritual. It wasn't about doors or locks or tapes or tunnels. It was about memory. About a child alone in a dark room, whispering a question to no one, and being answered. He didn't take them. They called to him. He listened. And once you knew that, you saw the pattern. In every disappearance, In every recovered object, in every song half remembered, he was in the process of forgetting. He was in the space between memories, in the breath between questions, in the mirror between blinks. And if you understood that, truly understood it, then you could never unknow it. Because he had been listening from the start, from beneath the floor, from beneath the lake, from beneath the name no one remembered. He was never coming. He was already here. And if you're reading this, if you followed the spiral, if the melody lingers in your head and you feel a question building behind your tongue, don't ask it. Whatever you do, don't ask the third question.